Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, today we are going to focus on the topic the body and the way it communicates. Now this is an area which I have touched upon in some of my earlier talks, and today we are going to focus in a detailed way on the non-verbal dimension, which has already been touched upon. So if you are looking at the slides, you will find that I will give you a general introduction to different dimensions, different aspects of body language, by which I mean gestures and postures, because facial expression is something which I will take care of at a later point of time. Then we will focus on gestures specifically and implicitly on postures. Certain aspects of space and territory I will share with you in an anecdotal way. Then we will go for an analysis of some images, some certain images, and with that we will conclude this part of the talk. So there are a lot of theories. I am just looking at one research which suggests that when we communicate, the textual message carries only 7% of the information. Tone of the voice, pauses, stress patterns and all kinds of things that we talked about in some of the earlier classes contribute to around 38% and non-verbal to 55%. But these statements are kind of sweeping generalizations, I would say, because a study has been done within a particular context, and within that particular context probably it has been found that this is the story. For instance, if you are looking at the context today where I am talking to you, then obviously the message content is not 7%, it has to be much higher than that. And in fact, voice and non-verbal communication would play a marginal role in the entire interaction, because you see that you are not so much bothered about what I look like, which probably would reverse this mechanism. 7% you are bothered about what I look like. Voice and tone, maybe you would still be bothered about 25 to 30%, because it relates to interest generation and all that. It can be irritable, it can be exciting or interesting. The voice qualities can communicate these things, but the message content probably is more than 50%. You are basically concerned about what I am saying rather than how I am saying it and what I look like. So the context is relevant, but in certain contexts the non-verbal communication component is fairly significant. This is what we gather from here. Again, another very well known study by Birdwhistle found that on an average people talk around 10 to 11 minutes a day, and face to face communication and non-verbal communication play a much more significant role. But my personal experience tells me that probably in a place like IIT Kharagpur we talk around 2 to 3 hours a day, and if you are looking at the students as well, you find that in spite of the number of hours they sit inside the classes, they still would be speaking for 2 to 3 hours, if not more than that. So again, we will not go for these overgeneralizations which you find in many of the body language non-verbal communication books. But my understanding by looking at various kinds of research is that well, to a certain extent the significance of non-verbal communication at no point of time can be undermined, but overgeneralizing and overstretching it is something which we should not do. So yes, I do take from some of the popular books the ideas, because it is easy for you to understand that, but interspersed with that are some research findings which I have understood, which I have also conducted in certain cases, and some of those findings also I will be sharing with you. Moreover, there will be certain very interesting tests that we will develop for you, which will deal with the concept of deceit or falsehood passing, because you see that is one of the things I will highlight as we proceed with this text, proceed with this talk, that deceit plays a very important role in our lives. And I hope it will be fun for you to do those surveys, but you must do them because their findings are going to be very relevant in the context of what we do over here. But moreover, more important, you see that as I told you, we have criticism to the overgeneralization of many of the popular non-verbal communication and body language books, where they overgeneralize, context specificity is lost, something researched in a specific context is applied to a different context and the meaning changes. Culture, learning and behavior, these are things which are not very often taken into consideration in the popular books. Different cultures have different ways of presenting facts. Learning and behavior are linked to one another, and learning plays a very significant role in behavior. For instance, when somebody comes to IIT, he or she behaves in a particular way, but by the end of, let us say, 2 to 3 years, a certain kind of a culture has been acquired, certain language, let us say, components are acquired, certain intonations, certain nonverbal displays have been acquired, which the person did not earlier possess, and these play a significant role. So, well, body language is to be looked at very carefully. One of the fundamental components debatable is cultural or inborn. What we mean by the two, because this is a highly debatable area and I will not go into the theories of it, but what I will try to share with you is that, is it that non-verbal communication is natural, or is it culturally acquired, socially acquired, the way certain aspects of language are socially acquired. My response to that would be that when we come to non-verbal communication, very much like verbal communication, the desire, the tendency and I would say the innate what would you call it, for anything else you would say, you would definitely call it tendency. The innate tendency, intuitive desire to communicate is very much there through the total body. However, the way it is channelized, the way it is modulated, the way it is regulated is something which is determined by cultural factors. I will explain this in a detailed way. For instance, when we are talking about smiles, we have found that studies tell us that even babies smile, babies which have not acquired social contact in a significant way smile, but the concept of meaningfulness of these smiles is something which is questionable. But even so, other studies have shown that when people smile, there is a physiological transformation which takes place. Paul Ekman, for instance, suggests that smiling constantly might make you at the end of the day feeling happy. At the end of the day, it might make you feel happy. So, what is happening basically is that smile is something which is probably inborn in certain way, but the way it is presented, the way it is regulated, the way exactly you smile is something which is a different story, which is probably socially acquired. Anger, agony, you find that there are some primeval primitive ways of showing anger by, let us say, baring the teeth, which happens with most animals, and it also happens with human beings when they are very angry. You watch movies where you find, especially Hindi movies, where exaggerations are the forte. You find that villains and even heroes fighting, baring their teeth. So, anger, agony, fear, there are some certain physiological symptoms, we will talk about that. But if we ask the question, are they the same in all cultures, we have answers which vary. In fact, when we do facial expressions, I will discuss with you how Paul Ekman did studies with aboriginal cultures and found that certain facial expressions persisted across cultures. So, if you are looking at the other aspect of things, understanding body language, some are better than others. Well, yes, it is true that some people can understand body language more intuitively or more conversant, the way some people are better at speaking a language and some people have to acquire that skill. So, if I am sharing something about body language, that implies that probably this talk will benefit you a little, and it will suggest ways that you can improve your understanding of non-verbal communication and body language, which tells us very simply that yes, body language skills can be acquired. The way at a later point we will discuss creativity or certain creative idea skills can be acquired. Now, talking about body language and culture, the fundamental expressions of emotions and non-verbal communication, probably I would like to spend a little more time on this before we go on to other things, because a clear understanding of some of the basic things is much better, and then you can always refer to other books. So, what we are talking about is, let us say that we consider that there are some fundamental emotions which are expressed through the body as well as through facial expressions, as well as through whatever we say and the way we say it. And if we roughly categorize them into 6 or 7 for the timing, because there is again a lot of debate about how many emotions, primary emotions are there, then we see that for instance, happiness is something which almost is universal. So is sadness, let us say, so is anger, fear, disgust, surprise, and according to certain theorists, even scorn, which are not socially learned. Let us say that, let us assume for the timing that they are acquired. They are not acquired, they have been there, they have been given to us, we have been biologically geared, hardwired to express these emotions in various ways. Now, assuming that, let us take up the example of smiles. Now, if you are looking at the way women smile and the way men smile within a culture, and you take snapshots of that in various situations, probably you will find a difference. In a similar way, if you look at young kids smiling and adults smiling in the same culture, probably you will find a difference. In the same way, if you are looking at different social strata, people from different social strata smiling in social events, you will find that there is a big difference. In other words, smiling and laughter are things which might be innate to us, but they are regulated by social norms. In different societies, different cultures, what you can display and what you cannot is controlled. So, fine, if you are on your own, you are inside your room, you are smiling, nobody is there, or you are laughing, nobody is there, you do it in a particular way. But the moment the cultural dimension comes in, the moment you are conscious of someone watching you, you would probably smile in a very different way, because smiling in a particular way is expected of you. So, here is an example of a social norm regulating a behavior which apparently is spontaneous. The same would be about sadness. Let us say, a very distinctive thing that comes to my mind is that, at least in our culture, and there might be many other cultures where gender difference is significantly acknowledged, where display of sadness is something which is regulated in different ways for males and females. For instance, in India, display of fear or sadness, let us stick to sadness, by men has to be controlled. One cannot just about abandon oneself and express one's sadness. If you don't, if you are a man and if you don't do well in your exam, you are not supposed to, you are not permitted to cry, whereas a girl may be permitted to cry. So, these are socially learnt again. So, display of sadness, anger, a man is supposed to, in our culture, display anger in a more distinctive way than a woman. So, you see that this is how cultural regulation of different emotions and the way they are displayed are regulated. These are known as display rules. Although we will not discuss this in detail, it is nice to share it, and you can always look it up and find out the fascinating world of non-verbal communication, where so many other interesting concepts exist. So, here are a few basic examples, just for a quick understanding. Nodding the head, yes and no. Now, there is a lot of cultural debate about there is a lot of debate about whether it is cultural or whether it is natural. So, you see that studies until this point of time have been inconclusive, and we do not really know for sure which one is the case, but there are traditions, including in certain parts of India, where you see that when you agree, you shake your head in a specific way, okay. But when you do not agree within the same culture, you nod your head in a different way, okay. but very often in other parts of the country people confuse that, where you say you nod your head this way to say yes and this way to say no, and this is something which does not exist in that particular tradition. So, there is a confusion, but there are certain cultures, and if you Google you will find that it is the case that in certain cultures shaking your head is considered as yes. Now, if you are looking at the mechanism of language, you find that most languages begin in some way being linked with a natural cause. If you are looking at written language, if you are looking at pictographs, ancient pictographs, the symbols virtually represent something out there which exists. Let us say a symbol of a bull standing for a bull, or a symbol of let us say circle standing for sun, and so on and so forth. And then these symbols gradually get transmuted, and the link with the natural world from which these emerged slowly disappear. And at that point of time, a particular gesture or a particular symbol, in this case a particular written symbol, has, although it is linked to its original meaning in certain ways, you find that the link is missing. You do not really know what has happened and how the connectivity can be traced. If you are looking at some of the gestures we make, you will find a similar thing. Such gestures which have a specific meaning, they can communicate a specific meaning, are known as emblems. Okay? And the function of emblems is that they specifically communicate a meaning which may not have absolutely anything to do with a natural orientation. For instance, certain emblems have a natural connection with what they suggest. For instance, this is an emblem for silence, and this has a link with the mouth. So, you can say that, well, this connection is very clear, or this is an emblem for drinking water or drinking liquid, and it is there, there is a definite connection between the two. But if you are looking at a thumb up sign which is an emblem, or a victory sign which is an emblem, or an appreciation or a zero sign which is an emblem, then you find that in these cases within a particular culture there is a certain degree of agreement as to what it means. In other cultures there might be an agreement as to what it means in a different way. Okay? So, if you are looking at some of the other things like sneer, this has probably a biological origin, because as I told you a little earlier, baring teeth is something which is there amongst many animals, including primates and human beings, when they want to display anger, when they want to bite, when they want to fight. Even today when people fight, even professional boxers fight, sometimes they bite one another. So, that is something which is probably very much biologically driven. But a shrug, I do not know, this kind of a shrug, again we do not really know if whether it is it has a natural origin or how did it actually emerge, but there must be a link to some kind of a natural origin. For instance, some of the emblems that we use, okay, like I come in peace, okay, palm up sign, waving a goodbye, these are at least at a certain point of time were biologically driven. That is what we get to know, because you find that in the early traditions, in early communities, people used to carry weapons. So, open palm gesture is initially a gesture which makes it very clear that I am unarmed, I am not carrying any weapons. And with time you find that instead of two hands, you have one hand, and these kinds of gestures gradually getting codified, becoming emblematic, becoming very, very symbolic, so that the original connection is something which is lost. Shaking hands as a form of greetings probably also has to do with a similar kind of thing, where the hand is empty without any weapon is something from which it might have started. Because you see that amongst tribes in the ancient periods, ancient times when socializations were getting initiated, these gestures had something in addition to a social meaning. They had a survival dimension to it, but these survival dimensions have been lost with civilization, and what has come down to us is something which we accept, we modify, we change in different ways. For instance, somebody tells me that in certain parts of in Southeast Asia, the namaskar that we use in many of the Indian traditions is prevalent. So, it must have been transmitted at some point of time and the gesture has been acquired over there. Okay. So, this is just to give you an idea of how things are. Okay is a popularized in the US in the 19th century, all correct, old, Kinderhook, that is how the etymologically the meaning emerges. Hand ring standing for O, in France it means 0, in Japan it can mean money, and in India it can mean appreciation. So, you see that the same gesture having different kinds of meanings in different places means that it is a conventional language use, it is not a natural language use. A natural language use is something which is transmitted or which is similar across cultures. A conventional language use is something which is different for different cultures, different languages, different countries, because that is where it has a specific limited meaning. So, thumbs up, again, as I told you in the earlier case, okay, all okay, or it can have a vulgar meaning, or it can also indicate a sense of superiority. Now, these are culturally determined rather than biologically driven. Or the victory sign that Churchill popularized, okay, and if the palm turns, again it becomes a vulgar symbol. So, these, and Queen Elizabeth probably confused the symbol at some point of time, it raised a lot of, or I am sorry, probably Margaret Thatcher, I do not remember who, but it finally led to a controversy because it was wrongly used, and these are very sensitive issues in social and cultural lives of different cultures. So, having said that, let us go on a little further and tell that all this that we have been talking about so far focus primarily on the conventional side of body language, but most of the people are interested primarily in the non conventional or the natural side of body language. Well, there is no such thing as that, as I have already expressed to you, but I would say conscious as opposed to unconscious. Consciously we make gestures which are very, very important for soft skills, because you see that you have to learn how to behave, what to do, what not to do, what to display, what not to display in a socio-cultural context. So, yes, in those contexts body language is important, but equally important is to guess the meaning of what somebody else is trying to say, or guess the ulterior motive of what somebody else is trying to conceal. Okay. Now, this becomes a very interesting, exciting, challenging thing, and most of us are interested in such a dimension of non-verbal communication as well, because you see that very often the important thing is to find out what somebody is actually thinking. We use the term actually, because in social life we tell a lot of lies, but we will come to that in a little while from now. The most important thing is that, like language, where you see that a word does not have a meaning without a context, nonverbal communication also does not have a meaning without the context. The first component of the context are other gestures, other postures, which together combined give a sense. The other part of the context is where somebody is making this gesture, the physical or the social space, the culture, and various other dimensions. So, you see that this is something which is not new, even if you are looking at our ancient book on Natya, which is performance, Natya Sastra. These have been already well codified, and we have a very interesting classification of Lokadharmi and Natyadharmi, and by Lokadharmi we mean that which is natural, I would roughly translate it as that, and by Natyadharmi we would say, we would consider things as culturally determined. So, that which is culturally determined is Natyadharmi, that is in the rules. A practitioner of performance has to follow those rules, and other people conventionally understand, and there are certain natural behavioral patterns people display everywhere, and performance has to acquire that. So, when we are looking at this codification, we find a huge number of clusters of gestures, postures, facial expressions, and what they could mean, what they could symbolize, which god, which goddess, which particular social strata, all this has been well codified for performance as well as dance, from which most of our Indian dances and theatre traditions have emerged. So, as I have indicated over here, a solitary gesture can be misleading. You need a context, you need a cluster of gestures, and of course, the totality of verbal and non-verbal codes together imply whatever has to be implied. and ambiguity of meaning is something which is very very strong over here when you compare this with, let us say, verbal gestures, or I am sorry, with verbalization. Why is it so? Because you see that at least words in most cases have clear meanings. We have already discussed this in some of the earlier slides and earlier talks that I had given you. But when it comes to non-verbal communication, you see that the meanings are personally interpreted. We do not have a dictionary, although attempts have been made. We do not really have a systematic dictionary of non-verbal communication which we have to follow. The rules have to be followed. The rules are made by every one of us, and at each point of time we keep on changing these rules. So, having said that, I will touch upon 2 or 3 other important components. One of the components is the concept of power. Non-verbal communication presents display of power, and if you remember in one of the earlier slides which I had taken from Tintin, I had discussed this, and you say that probably the display of social status, of power, of masculinity, of femininity is much more distinctively done in non-verbal communication than through verbal or vocal communication. This is something we have to remember. I will definitely be giving you certain slides which deal with these, certain references. You can Google and find them. You can have some, maybe 1 or 2 papers and books on body language which are commonly available, where you will get to know some of these issues in a detailed way. But very quickly I will talk about something which is significant in the context of non-verbal communication, which is the concept of zone circumstances, space. Now, space plays a very significant role in non-verbal communication. I will quickly share with you how many books have defined it. Well, it has a certain significance and it is meaningful in certain ways. That is why I am sharing it with you, which is that when you are very close to somebody, you can approach that person. The proximity is something which is allowed by 2 people. Hence, you find that these people can converse at a distance which can be considered intimate or personal distance. On the other hand, if you know a person formally, you will maintain a certain distance, maybe 3 feet or 2.5 feet or 3 feet or 4 feet, whatever it is, and then you can call it a social space. Even in a classroom like this, there are maybe 20-30 people sitting at different distances from you. We have a social space, but social space is one where you see that you do not have to shout, and you are still able to maintain eye contact, establish your facial expression, other displays of body are distinctively available to the people, and you can transact at that distance in a social way. So, space is still relevant over here, but a public space, a much greater distance is one where you are at such a distance that only your gestures and distinctive gestures can be identified and nothing else, and in such a space you can only communicate very very formal things and not intimate or social things. So, space plays a significant role in non-verbal communication in many ways. This is just one of them. The other one is space and the concept of territory. If I am sitting in front of a table, then generally I put things in front of me on the table. I do not, and if let us say I am sitting over here and somebody else sitting next to me, I generally do not put things on his space or her space. So, why do we observe this? Because we have tentatively at some level assume that that is his space or his territory, and this is my space, my territory, and I must differentiate between the two. You find that most fights on trains are about space and territory, because you see that traveling second class, or very often you find people are crowded, the space is crowded and people are not very comfortable. Initially you find that they are stiff, they are sometimes fighting, very particular about which seat they have to sit in, and gradually over a period of let us say 12 hours, 15 hours, you find that people are relaxing, they have met friends. Now, I am putting my leg on your seat, you are putting your hand on my seat, we are more or less comfortable and we do not mind that. So, these territories, giving him a little bit of my territory to the other person, these social adjustments in the context of non-verbal communication take place and have symbolic implications even in the context of actual physical space and territory. For instance, research has found that criminals, very often people who are violent, need more space than normal people, and in a particular socio-cultural context, what happens is that the person who needs less space assumes that the other violent person also needs an equal amount of space, whereas the other violent person is feeling uncomfortable, and that probably gives rise to a lot of conflict. Studies have been done on these aspects of things as well. We also realize that space is context specific. What I mean by this is that if you are inside a lift where there is less space, you follow certain conventions, you fold your hands and stand in a particular way to say that I am not interested to touch anybody, I am not interested to take anybody else's space. Okay. Whereas you find that if let us say in a place which is much larger, people are standing very closed and huddled together, they have to be friends. Okay. Otherwise, if people stand huddled together, then it is something which some of the other group members will find abnormal. Okay. So, space rituals we follow space rituals in cinema halls, in public spaces, in different places, and in different places we have different space rituals. In public spaces, sometimes space is constricted and we follow certain rituals like palm inside, okay, a protective gesture. And even if you are looking at your palm, you find that this part of your palm is considered more private than this part, which is considered more public. So, starting from posture, gesture to touching behavior, here everywhere certain social rituals are followed, and we need to be aware of them. Now, culture and zones, we have found that you find that in one of my earlier talks I shared with you that different kinds of spaces are maintained between males and males, males and females and males in Indian culture. You might find this varying in different cultures, and you see that country people and city people behave differently when it comes to space. Very often you find that in a deserted late bus in a crowded city, if there are 5 people, they would be sitting in 5 different corners, because they are not interested to talk to one another after having spent hours after hours talking to people and socializing. On the other hand, if the same bus is travelling through the countryside in India, you might find that the moment a person walks in and finds one person sitting, he might go and sit down next to that person, because here people are not yet tired of having talked to one another. So, different places have different rituals. So, handshakes for instance in different places have different implications. In let us say cities where space is not there, maybe people shake hands like this, whereas in a country or a small town people might shake hands like this, and in many other places, sparsely populated areas like Australia, people may not even shake hands, and because proximity brings us together and then touching behavior start. So, these are some very interesting things about non-verbal communication. We talked about space and territory, and space sometimes you find that is very relevant, and studies have found that even a small person who is sitting behind the wheels of a big car might certainly show aggression, because he feels that the car is an extension of his body. So, you find that it is not only our body, but the different things that are attached to our body which we feel are significantly associated, and we start using them as well. One of them happens to be social power, which is imposed, and even there a small really tiny person might behave in ways which indicating let us say power, display of power, and so on and so forth. So, what we are going to do in this part of the study, this part of the talk, is to go in for a study. As I told you, this short talk is not a place where we can go into the details of specific non-verbal communication. However, the idea here was to make you aware of the very interesting dimensions of non-verbal communication. One, to make you aware that once you start doing research in the field, you realize that many of the very popular notions of non-verbal communication need to be accepted with a pinch of salt. By reading 5 non-verbal communication popular books, you will be better at understanding non-verbal communication. Well, that is not going to happen. But before we go on to this, let me just point to something else which is not here on this slide, but which I have given you links to, which is the concept of deceit. In socialization and in social space, we are very often compelled to tell lies, and these lies, although we suppress them in our speech, get reflected physiologically in some way or the other, because you see that what we are feeling in our body and mind is something which we are not trying to display, which we are trying to conceal, and when we do that, then the body behaves in a particular way. Now, this is very interestingly in the context of facial expressions, which we will take up in the next session and detail it out over there, but let me simply share very quickly with you that in gestures also and the way we sit and all that, eye contact and a few other things, these displays are there. When somebody is in a deceitful or lying situation, the non-verbal communication also reacts in specific ways. Now, some of these guidelines will be provided in the links, where we will discuss this in detail. I will also share with you certain interesting quizzes, or you might say even challenges, where I will request you to see how good you are at identifying deceit in other people. So, we will do that at a later point of time. However, here in the next part we are quickly looking at non-verbal communication, so that you get an idea. We cannot do all of it in this short space of the next 5 minutes, but at least I will give you an idea. If you are looking at this painting by Pablo Picasso, you find that the drooping head, the closed eyes, the languid movement of the fingers on the guitar, the way that the body is folded, everything suggests a sadness about the entire thing. Of course, the colors play also a significant role here. So, here is a very interesting way that artists try to capture non-verbal communication, and probably that is where we learn the best way to understand non-verbal communication in socio-cultural contexts. Now, you see that when we are looking at non-verbal communication, these are the highlights we are looking at: facial expression, the gazing behavior, how people are looking at one another or avoiding the other's eyes, gestures that people make, postures they hold, arrogant postures, submissive postures and things like that, head position, context and ambience, the background. So, I will show you 3 to 4 illustrations. I do not have much more time for anything else. It is a painting by Norman Rockwell, 1936, and if you are looking at the painting, if I ask you a simple question, who seems to be the leader? After some thought, probably you will say that this is the leader. This probably is Tom Sawyer, and this is Huckleberry Finn, because you see that the posture, the leaning backward and judging the way that he is painting the fence, all those things, and the hand probably on his waist, all these things suggest a sense of power, whereas the other person is leaning forward and is bent with hands over his knees, is suggestive of subservience to the leader, who is this person. If you remember the Tintin image that we analyzed earlier, there also we found something pretty similar to this, that the leader was leaning backwards and the follower was leaning forward. Here is another one, very distinctive image by Norman Rockwell, where the body language is very distinctively, very subtly displayed. Somebody is propped against the pillar acts as a protection, knees close together, legs folded close, withdrawing from what he conceives to be an attack. So, this is the protection you have over here. This is one of the issues, things that you see over here. And how is it that aggression is being displayed? This man over here, whom you can barely see, is displaying his aggression by looking very closely at this white woman in a black church. You find that there is an old woman over here with a Bible folded, and he is looking obliquely at this person. This man seems to be a person who is not aggressive, but displaying his unhappiness, assertion at the fact, why is it that a white woman is inside a black church, whereas the woman is more inquisitive, leaning more in that direction, looking directly, and the girl over here, you see that although she is apparently praying and her head has not changed position, the eyes are looking in the other direction. So, if you are looking at this image very quickly, you find that these displays of non-verbal communication do manage to communicate significantly what is being communicated or what is being attempted. I had it in mind to take a test, probably I will take the test of these slides when we are doing the online survey, but here are a couple of examples of the way that just by looking at images you are able to find out how people are let us say predisposed or disposed. You find that Captain Haddock is looking at this animal, and you see that the animal is obviously not very happy with what is happening over here, and anger is displayed in his eyes, and the captain is probably not aware of it, whereas Tintin is looking at the entire thing amusedly at a distance. Okay. The second image on the other hand shows action and movement, and whereas this movement obviously indicates that Tintin is trying to chase somebody, which is very obvious. These are telltale displays of surprise, because turning round with mouth wide open, eyes staring, and in this case this person is about to stand up with his hands on the desk, using the desk as a support to quickly get up. Now, these are places where you find that non-verbal communication does manage to communicate. If you look at the other slides as well, you will find that in each case very quickly some concept is getting suggested just through non-verbal communication. But as I told you, time is short, so we will not go into a detailed analysis of these images, and we will stop here and we will focus on facial expressions in the next set of slides. Thank you very much.